The ICS L86 comes stock with an ICS Turbo 3000 motor. Originally I was disappointed in the stock L86 motor performance. I immediately swapped the motor out for my first season. I'm here again swapping motors and I'll go over that process and give some tips. In my initial upgrade, I ran the Tienly 35K 16 TPA motor last season and I was getting between 25 to 28 rounds per second. I found this to be exhausting my ammo too quickly as I'm only running mid-caps. In the off-season, I initially picked up a 19K 28 TPA Chihai motor to try out, however I suspected this might be a little bit too slow for my liking. After an aggressive first season of play, I also found that I burnt out my motor brushes. Now I'm also looking for a motor replacement with a slightly slower rate of fire. I recently also got the T238 T2 short motor, which is a 29K 20 TPA motor with neodymium magnets and a built-in rotor exhaust fan. The T238 motor turned out to be just perfect for rate of fire, giving a reasonable 20 rounds per second when it's paired with a standard gear ratio 18:1 and an 11.1 volt LiPo battery. Of course, you have to start by fully disassembling the L86 to get at the motor cage. If you're unfamiliar with this process, I go over the steps in my L86 unboxing and overview video. When you swap your motor, you should take the time with the process. You may get lucky and be able to skip some steps and simply swap the motor out. This might be true, especially if it's an identical match to the one you're replacing. However, don't even take that for granted. When picking out a motor, keep in mind that the RPM rating is not the only thing to look for to get your rate of fire. You should also consider the TPA, or term for armature, your gear ratio, and what type of battery and voltage you're using. Just going from a 7.4 to an 11.1 volt battery offers a rate of fire boost on its own. But if you do that, you should make sure your rifle's electrical system and trigger can manage it before going to higher voltage batteries. There are also a few empirical rate of fire equations out there in tech forums that can help you plan your build. I dabbled with the idea of using 7.4 volt batteries to get a slower rate of fire, but the 11.1 volt batteries that I have for my L86 are quite large and won't be usable in any of my other rifles. I didn't want them to go to waste. Remove the old motor from the motor cage and install the new one. When you install the motor in the motor cage, also be mindful of which side your positive and negative wires are ran for your gun. You should install the motor the same way every time. If you put your motor in backwards, your wiring may not fit well. For the ICS L86, you'll have to use the original stock motor spring because the L86 motor cage has an oversized diameter groove for the spring to seat into. Most new motors come with a smaller diameter spring, which is more suited to generic AEG platforms and won't work on the L86. When you install your motor, you may notice that it kicks or spins around a fair amount in the motor cage. What you should do is try to shim or fur out any free space between the motor and the motor cage to help it stay steady. In my case, I used electrical tape strips on the four sides to build out the width of the motor to minimize the rotation in the motor cage during motor operation. For the T238 motor, also be careful not to obstruct the exhaust fan vents on the sides of the motor. Install your motor in the motor cage and slide it in the lower receiver with the bevel gear in. When you first test fit your motor, you can attach the one motor cage screw to the receiver and confirm motor height to get an adequate engagement on the bevel gear. You can also fine-tune this a bit later by adjusting the motor height to see if the sound changes when firing the rifle. Once you're satisfied with the motor height, go ahead and fully install the motor to the lower with only the bevel gear in. At this point, you want to check the shimming between your motor and your bevel gear and see if you need any adjustment. You want to minimize play but still have just enough so that it's not going to screech. If you make a shimming adjustment, you'll have to follow that through all three gears and readjust your shimming entirely. I had to readjust my shimming when I swapped from the Tienly motor to the Chihai motor, but after going from the Chihai motor to the T238, it actually worked without modifying the shimming. Now it's time for some chrono to check rate of fire. Unfortunately, I don't have a chrono of the stock ICS motor using an 11.1 volt battery, which would give a better rate of fire comparison, but you could expect it to perform similarly to the Chihai motor. The original stock motor put out a measly 8 rounds per second using a 7.4 volt battery, which is far too slow for this full auto platform. After I added in a MOSFET and upgraded the motor, I started using 11.1 volt LiPo batteries. The Chihai motor let out 15 rounds per second on an 11.1 volt LiPo, however this was a little bit slower than I was thinking. If you want to boost this motor a little bit, you can use something like a 16:1 gear ratio. Finally, the T238 motor is laying out a comfortable 20 rounds per second, which is approximately a 25% savings on ammo compared to what I was running last season. This allows the rifle to still sound a bit aggressive and intimidating, but to conserve a little bit of ammo compared to my experience last season. For my setup last season, I used the Tienly motor and I ran 28.5 to 28 rounds per second on 11.1 volt LiPo. It sounded quite impressive and intimidating, but burnt ammo far too quickly for sustained support on a big field and a long game.
What? How much? The gun itself?
Yeah, how much can I buy it for?
Oh, no. No. I definitely put some work into it though, so it's not stock.